Hello and welcome to Three Skulls Tavern. I'm your host Matt, and this is the last in my series of prep videos for my upcoming The One Ring solo campaign. And the reason this is the last of the videos is because Strider Mode has landed in the inboxes of all the Kickstarter backers. This is the set of rules that Free League have commissioned from renowned game designer Sean Tompkin, who's famous for Iron Sworn and now Starforged, and Matt Click, another really excellent game designer known with Absolute Tabletop. Anyway, this video is going to be a kind of first look at Strider Mode. I know anyone who's backed the Kickstarter will have already probably devoured it by now, but there are a lot of people I've seen in the community who haven't had, well, basically didn't back the Kickstarter and haven't actually seen it yet. They've just been hearing those of us talking about it and, ooh, this is exciting. Oh, I like this little bit and this little thing. So I thought it might be useful to kind of just go through it relatively quickly to kind of talk about what's inside there. At the same time, I'm going to be talking about how I'm going to be implementing some of this in my own campaign and whether I'll be making any changes to the previous things I had talked about in the last 4 episodes. By the way, if you are interested in seeing the prep that I've done, the first 4 episodes in this series were talking about character concepts, talking about adventure concepts, if you will, talking about Foundry prep, because I'm going to be running this in Foundry, which is a virtual tabletop if you're not familiar. And then the last one was looking at Ruins of the Lost Realm, which is an expansion that also came out a couple of weeks ago, and really has a lot of exciting sandbox tools, perfect for solo play, taking place in and around Tharbad, which is a bit south of Bree. Well, halfway between Bree and Isengard, really. Anyway, so there's the previous 4 videos. Links are all in the description below if you want to go and watch them. But this one, as I said, is all about Strider Mode. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm also going to be looking at 2 other supplements, possibly. They are Peoples of Wilderland, which is an expansion providing 3 additional cultures from the first edition of the game. Bjornings, Wild Elves, I think it's the Mirkwood Elves. Elves of Mirkwood, they're called. The Woodmen of Wilderland, and yeah, those are the 3. So the reason I'm going to be looking at that is they're now available. They came in the same email that Strider Mode came to us with. And that means there's now a possibility to play with 3 additional cultures in my solo game. So the things are opening up a bit more, and that was quite exciting. And the third one to look at is a character life path PDF, which I'm very excited about. I love life path character generation. I didn't do it for the first character I rolled up in the first part of this series. So I will be looking at that and possibly rolling up a character. However, I'm kind of interested in a Bjorning, and we don't have life path character generation tables for the 3 new cultures. I know some people are working on them as homebrew, and they might be sharing them in the various communities. So I might be doing that later. So if I do make a Bjorning or maybe a Woodman or something like that, then I'll still show the character life path PDF, but I won't actually create it myself. I'll do that offline before the video starts, my actual play starts. And just before I jump in, the actual play will be happening in actually probably in 3 weeks' time, beginning of June. And it's going to jump straight into, I'll probably do 5-minute quick chat about what the game is about. But really, I consider these 5 videos I've done as prep my session 0. So I won't be doing a full session 0, episode for them. They will be fully edited. They'll be the target is to have them about 30 minutes long. And yeah, dropping every so often. I'm not 100% sure how soon that will be. I'm trying to make some changes, get my work-life balance kind of in the right place. Anyway, let's jump over to Strider Mode. And to do that, I'm going to just change my overlay settings here. And you're, of course, in the wrong one here. So let me just bring my PDF Exchange editor up. Not Google Sheets. That's going to come up later if I've got time to show off some Foundry stuff. Okay, so this is not the right one. That's Peoples of Wilderland. They're all color-coded, actually. This is Strider Mode. This is Peoples of Wilderland. And this is Character Life Path. You can see down here, Character Life Paths, Peoples of Wilderland. You can see the icon here in the middle of the ring is also changing for each of them, which is a kind of nice touch. So, Strider Mode. Let's have a look at this. There's a bit of an intro. I'm not going to really talk around. It just tells you what it's about, what is solo roleplay, how this supplement works, the basic philosophy, the core tables that are in Strider mode, and then it talks about changes made to adventuring phases and fellowship phases, and also a little bit about cooperative play. This is suitable to play cooperatively, although really it's generally, I mean, it can be used for 2 or more players, but really the content of this works best when you're playing just with 2. And for people asking, I'm not sure when this is going to be available to the general public. It is going to go on sale. I believe the price is going to be $4.99 US, but I don't know exactly when that's going to be happening. But it's not like a Kickstarter exclusive. So, yeah, I don't know exactly when. If I find out when from Free League, I will pop it into the comments. So check the comments. Look for a comment from me. In fact, I'll have a pinned comment at the top of this video, and I'll add the date to that pinned comment if I find out what the date is. Right. So, really, the kind of the big thing to talk about here, in my opinion, well, there's a few things, but there's 3 main tables. The telling table, which is like a yes/no oracle. There's the lore table, which basically gives you a set of 3 prompts, which are effectively noun, verb, and adjective, maybe not in that order. And they're all themed around the Lord of the Rings, or Middle-earth. So that's quite cool as well. You've got this sort of action and theme oracle, for those of you familiar with Ironsworn. And then last we have, in terms of tables, we have the fortune and ill fortune tables. And what these are, it says here, prompts. Basically, they're tables you can roll on if you roll a Gandalf rune or an Eye of Sauron, and you want to add a little bit more spice to whatever that result is, rather than just saying, oh, it's whatever it is, right? You can actually say, oh, I want to have something a little bit more interesting happen because of this critical success or this critical failure, this mishap, that sort of thing. And those tables are there to just give you a bit of a prompt. Because normally in a normal game, the lore master or the GM would say, okay, you've had a critical failure here. This is what that means in the context, and they'll have a little bit of a think about how that works and tell you what happens. And you can't obviously really do that in in solo play. So those prompts are there if you need the help. Not necessarily meant to be used every time. And then for the adventuring phase, there's quite a few interesting things in here. The big one really is that it's this one here, the new combat stance, the skirmish stance. So in addition to the 4 normal stances in the core rulebook, we have a 5th skirmish stance. It is specifically a range stance, but allows you to engage with, melee enemies. So yeah, it kind of is like a mobile archery stance. I've playtested these rules actually, and I created an elf cheese build, let's call it, where I basically had a really high combat proficiency in bows. I had a fairly decent a parry rating as well, so to make it hard for me to be hit. And I did a combat with 3 adversaries, 1 goblin archer and 2 orc soldiers, I believe, off the top of my head. And it lasted 10 rounds with me basically doing skirmish. And I think anyway, I think the thing with skirmish stance is, well, first of all, I wouldn't recommend going toe-to-toe with 3 orcs as a starting character. You're going to really struggle. But as you start getting experience, you start getting more proficient, you start getting more badass, you're going to be able to potentially do that with the skirmish stance. Worth noting is if you're playing a character who doesn't really go in for archery, like my planned, player hero, not player character, doesn't really have anything. I think has 1 point in bows, but really is meant to be a more of a melee type of character. Then this skirmish stance isn't really going to be used. So it's just really there as a kind of a survivability sort of thing. So you can kind of shoot at people at a distance. You can obviously engage with ranged enemies who might be attacking you. So if you're playing melee, you've got to kind of, I guess you could kind of anyway. It makes things a bit more dynamic on the battlefield, but it does require you to have a bow. I probably don't want to spend much more time talking about that because that was quite a bit diving into it anyway. There's also some exciting changes to journeying, which we'll talk about in more detail when we get there, including a bunch of journeying tables, which I think are quite exciting. Okay, and fellowship phase, there have been a few changes to how shadow is removed during the fellowship phase. We'll get to that as well. Yeah, in the comments, Mr. Debacle says that I see skirmish stance as a way to get the feeling of Legolas in the movies. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Legolas is constantly moving around when they're having fights, firing arrows off all over the place. People are coming to attack him, and he's kind of like shooting at point blank range and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, very very much Legolas mode. Okay, let's move down. This first section of the Strider mode is talking about changes to character creation, or how to do character creation, recommendations for it. The first thing that it talks about is previous experience. And the core rulebook says that, the core rulebook allows you to have 10 experience points to spend on bumping up skills, bumping up combat proficiencies. And in Strider mode, it gives you 15. Now, I would personally, it depends on how hard you want it to be when you start off. For my own playtesting, I would probably start with a little bit more than that. I might go up to 20 or do something a bit differently and give myself one free combat proficiency to take one combat proficiency up to 3, which will really, really help with survivability in a fight, but still make it a challenge, and then save the other 15 points for skills. However, that could be seen as cheating, but in my opinion, solo is you're playing by yourself, and there is no such thing as cheating. These rules are here to be used and abused, and yeah, I'm just giving my own little pointers as I go through. But technically, according to this, it's recommending that you do 15 points, which will give you a little bit of a bump up. Now, I do say this when I did playtest this. There has been a change made since, which is that we'll get to this about journeying mode. Any rolls made when you're journeying are made as favored rolls. That makes a big difference. It makes a big, yeah. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I think the 15 points is probably a good place to start. If you want it to be a little bit easier on yourself, maybe give yourself a small bump there. Okay, safe haven. Really important to have a safe haven in solo mode because that's where you're going to be resting in between adventures. It's going to be like your home, basically. So you need that place. The way this game is arranged is adventure. You've got an adventure phase. You've got a fellowship phase. And that fellowship phase, you need to go back to your safe haven. So safe haven is really important here. And coming up with that is important, obviously. Fellowship scores changed. You don't actually calculate fellowship score based on the number of player heroes because there's only 1, maybe 2. Instead, you have a fellowship bonus of 3. That's what this bit here says. Plus any of the bonuses you might get from virtues, cultural blessings, and or your patron. So it's, rather than representing the bonds between you and your company, signifies your connection to the communities you serve and the wilds you roam. A hope that cannot be diminished by the shadows. So that's quite interesting. It's not removing the fellowship score completely from the game. It's just twisting it, or not twisting, it's changing it a bit and making it more about, maybe think of it like a community score rather than fellowship, if you will. There is no such thing as fellowship focus here because obviously the fellowship focus is used for journeying, and it kind of looks at different roles that you take during journeying. That doesn't really apply here. In fact, the journeying rules show how to do that instead. Some really exciting things coming up there. Yeah, virtues. This just really talks about when you're coming up with virtues, ignore virtues that have to do with a fellowship, a group, because some of them are worded around kind of being group focused. That's all it's saying. Otherwise, there's no real changes there. And this is quite interesting as well. Every solo player gets this free distinctive feature called Strider. Wandering the wilds of Middle-earth alone hardens the spirit and sharpens the senses, as you are forced to remain ever watchful for perils in the periphery. Solo player heroes receive an extra distinctive feature, Strider. While journeying, the player hero is considered inspired on skill rolls. So, while journeying, the player hero is considered inspired on skill rolls. Bear that in mind when we get to the journeying section later. But that's a really nice little touch, I think, that makes things a little bit less brutal on player heroes, solo player heroes. Okay, patron is the last thing to talk about with your character hero, and having a patron is really important. Obviously, for a solo player, it's extremely important because it's one of the main ways you're going to be given missions. You're going to be given things to do. Quests, as they're called here. And what Sean and Matt have come up with is basically a D6 table for each of the patrons listed in the core rulebook. Unfortunately, we don't have any for Elrond from Rivendell, I don't believe. No. I'm just scrolling through here a bit. I'm not going to read them in detail, so we'll just go to the last one. Basically, what it does actually say is you can either roll randomly, you can pick one as you will, or you can work your way through one at a time, starting at the top and working your way down. So they've kind of been ordered in that way that it could almost make like a sort of mini campaign in terms of themes that you're exploring. So that's actually the way I plan on using these patron quests, is to use them as a one at a time, starting with 1, going down to 6. Obviously, you can do it however you want, but I think it's a really nice, interesting touch, and it gives you some kind of hooks with your patron to kind of look into. You're obviously only going to see your patron once every fellowship phase, if that, depending on who your patron is. So this gives you potentially 6 adventure phases to go through, if not more. You're going to be picking up lots of additional stuff as you go from NPCs and all the rest of it. So there's really a lot of opportunity to play for quite a long time using these. Okay, experience milestones is the last thing. I completely forgot about this. But rather than doing the flat experience points and adventure points rewards that the core rulebook has, it has this interesting milestone table that you go through. Now, I'm very experienced with the Year Zero engine. I'm a massive fan of the Year Zero engine, and all of the Year Zero engine games have these tables. So I'm very used to this, and I think it's quite an interesting way to handle this thing. That means, and the reason for this is because sessions are very fluid when you're playing solo. You might only have 30 minutes to sit down and play something. You might have 6 hours. You might have a whole weekend to yourself. Whatever it might be, it's hard to tell what a session is when you're playing solo, because you can literally take as long as you want or as long as you have. And because of that, using these milestones is a much more what's the word for that? Compatible way of gathering experience when you're playing on your own. And as you can see from this list, it's things like whenever you accept a mission from a patron, you get 1 adventure point. When you complete a mission, you get 1 adventure point and 1 skill point. If you complete a meaningful journey, you get 2. If you face a noteworthy encounter during a journey, you get 1 skill point, etc., etc. And yeah, you gain them as you go along. But I can't remember. I think you spend them during your fellowship phase, so you don't get the kind of D&D style, I've got the right number of experience points for my next level, so right in the middle of this dungeon, ding, I'm suddenly better at whatever, and I've got this new ability that I didn't have before. I can't remember if that's how it works in the core rulebook, but that's certainly how I would be playing it anyway, is you gain the experience as you go, but you spend them to better your character when you are in your fellowship phase. Anyway, so that's quite exciting. I think that's quite cool. And that's actually something that would be very useful in GM'd or group play as well. Okay. That's the character stuff done. So otherwise, character creation follows the rules from the core rulebook. That's really cool, I think. Yeah, what do you think? There's very small changes, really. Really, the only changes are we've got this new distinctive feature. We've got more experience points to start off with. We have patron quests, and we have a new way to gather experience points. It's relatively simple, the changes have been made, but they're all really good changes, in my opinion. They really it keeps things as close to vanilla as possible, while, adding stuff to make it work better for solo. Right, the system. So this is where we're going to find the 3 tables that were mentioned before. And really, I think there's a couple of things to point out here. This is a big one here, setting the target number. If you've played or you've looked at the starter set, the target number for your attributes is 18, not 20. That means that when you're looking at your target numbers, when you're calculating your target numbers, they're actually going to be a little bit easier because the starting number is a little bit lower. That's easy to do in Foundry as well. Just for those of you using Foundry, you go to the system settings and there's a number there you can change. It's, I think default set to 20. Anyway, so that's really good. That also means it's going to be a little bit easier. It does say here, this will make your player here more capable and self-reliant when they must face the challenges. I mentioned that combat where I was cheesing, skirmish stance in playtesting, and I have to admit, I survived. It took 10 rounds. It was a very long fight. I was nearly dead by the end, But I did survive. I did manage to overcome all of all of my foes, and I wouldn't have if I had been using 20 instead of 18. So it definitely is. I mean, unless you're somebody who loves Dark Souls and wants a Dark Souls experience, which in my opinion isn't Lord of the Rings, you can always leave it higher. But yeah, 18's that's a really good change, I think. Okay, reading the feat die. So whenever you're taking action, it says, and you're rolling the feat die, if it comes up with a Gandalf rune or comes up with an Eye of Sauron, you roll another feat die, and you can roll another feat die and consult either of these tables, right? The fortune table for when you roll a Gandalf Eye rune, and the ill fortune table when you roll the Eye of Sauron. And it's saying here, keep in mind that you're free to gloss over these results. Just consider the nature of the success or failure in the context of the situation and move on. So it's kind of, they're making the point of saying you don't need to do this every single time one of these comes up in a normal skill test or any kind of test. It's just there if you want to add a little bit of extra spice, a little bit of extra pizzazz to your experience. So that's quite cool. And there are things like, for fortune, you gain favored ground, you locate or learn of a useful item. So it's not there. Some of these aren't always going to apply in every situation. And in fact, I would even say you could just scan through this list and pick one. You wouldn't necessarily need to roll. Although I guess the top and the bottom ones are either really good or really bad. So maybe rolling makes sense, but they're not always going to make sense. Enemies run afoul of danger, for example. If you're, I don't know, not around any enemies, if you're rolling some sort of like social tests in a city or a town, it might be hard to interpret that. So yeah, that's where you might not necessarily use them. Whatever, they're there if you want them. Cool. Then it talks here about skill special success tables. So this is the same table that you find in the core rulebook right in the beginning, I think in the intro chapter. So you can spend one success icon to gain insight, go quietly, make haste, widen influence, build advantage, or cancel a failure. These have been rewritten slightly for solo play. I'm not going to go through the changes, but it's worth having those and using them at the table when you have the success icons coming up on your success dice. And that's what it kind of says here. So these special successes. Okay. Using risk levels, it's saying here it is recommended to use risk levels when visualizing or resolving a risky action. This will add more variety to the outcome. Most actions you take should be at standard risk level. This is the default unless you decide the situation warrants otherwise. I'll be honest, I only used standard the whole time I was doing my playtest. It wasn't a huge playtest, it was just one session. But it makes sense. I mean, if you're familiar with Blades in the Dark or any Forged in the Dark games, this is kind of like that, where you're setting the stakes of the roll before you make the roll, and you're determining, if it goes badly, if it goes pear-shaped, if you fail the roll, it might not just be a simple failure. It might not just be a relatively bad failure. It could be, as it says here, foolish risk level. A failure is a disaster. So you don't even need to roll the Eye of Sauron. If you just fail the roll, it's going to be disastrous consequences. And the examples here are things like picking the pockets of a hungry troll. That'd be pretty foolish to do, right? And if you did fail the roll of picking their pocket, yeah, it's going to be pretty disastrous. You're going to be caught, you're going to be popped into a sack, and you're going to be sat on to squish you in a jelly, right? Playing a riddle game with a dragon. Also a foolish thing to do, etc. Okay. It talks about how to use them, and basically it's, yeah. It's fairly straightforward. It's kind of similar to the core rulebook as well. The telling table is the next one. This is a yes-no oracle for those of you familiar with solo gaming. And it looks a little bit unusual here, but bear in mind that a feat die, I should say. I think I had one here. No, I've packed them all away. A feat die goes, is a 12-sided die. It goes from 1 to 10, and it has an Eye of Sauron and a Gandalf rune on the other side. So whenever you're asking a question, you're meant to formulate the question with yes being the positive outcome. That's important. And this came up in Discord where I kind of missed that out when I was originally using it. But that is actually important in case you roll the Eye of Sauron or the Gandalf rune. Then you set the chance. Middling is default. That is roughly going to work out as 50-50. Then you roll one feat die and you consult the table for your answer. Now I'll give you an example here. Let's say you're walking on a road and you hear footsteps coming towards you. And you are in an area where there have been rumors of, orcs. There have been people have been talking about orcs have been spotted in the region. It's overrunning with orcs, etc. So you might ask the telling table, who comes around the corner? But rather than asking who comes around the corner, it has to be yes or no. You might say, is it someone from a friendly culture coming around the corner? Now, that's phrasing it as a yes being the positive outcome. So if you were to say yes, it is someone like that. Otherwise, you could ask the question from a negative perspective might be, do orcs come around the corner? And if you were to say, do orcs come around the corner, you might say it's certain or likely. But again, it'll change the way these work here. So phrase it as, is it a friendly culture coming around the corner? Doubtful, I would suggest. So when you roll your feat die, that D12 die, if it's 1 to 7, the answer is no. If it's 8, 9, or 10, then yes, it is a friendly culture. If it's a Gandalf rune, it's always yes with an extreme result or a twist. So that's, the best possible yes and, basically. And if it's a Sauron eye, the Eye of Sauron, I should say, it's always no with an extreme result or twist. So it's basically no and. So that's pretty cool. I like how it gives you a way to sort of change the chance, the probability of something occurring before you roll. There's something very similar in Ironsworn and Starforged as well, so it's not surprising to see this. But I'm glad it's also using the feat die, which is quite interesting. It adds in that really nice way of having the kind of yes and the no and results. Okay. Trust your gut. You don't always... this is really good advice for solo play generally. You do not always need to be asking the telling table questions. So if something seems obvious, go with your gut, or there's something that might, take your story in interesting directions. Don't bother asking the oracle. Just go with it. That's really, really good advice. Again, you're beholden to no one except yourself. For me, it's a little bit different, maybe because I'm streaming and I'll be trying to follow the rules so that people can learn the rules as I'm playing. But really, there's no wrong way to play solo because it's just you. So yeah, go with your gut. Hey, Francesco. Right. Then we got the lore table. The lore table is quite cool. Yeah. Again, I've mentioned this before at the beginning. Anyone who's familiar with Ironsworn or Starforged, in Ironsworn, it's called the action and theme oracles, and they're renamed. I can't remember off the top of my head. I haven't had a chance to play Starforged. I'm waiting for the physical copies to arrive. They've got slightly different names, but they're basically a verb and a noun. And here they're expanded by having a verb, a noun, and an adjective. Specifically, the action is the verb, the aspect is the adjective, and the focus is the noun. And these are all basically themed around Middle-earth. So you're not going to, you'd expect that anyway, but it does have a lot of really good flavor. I've rolled on these a number of times. They're really good. And there's basically, gives you some advice here on when you would roll them. So it can answer questions such as, what is the nature of these woods? You would roll on aspect. It gives you an adjective about it. It might be they're bright. It might be they're dark. It might be they're good. It might be they are impenetrable, etc. What mission does my patron have for me? Roll on all three. So it might be arrive, foreboding, power. No idea. But it starts the brain ticking, right? And that's what you want. Next one, what do I find within the ruins? Aspect and focus. So you have this adjective and you have a noun. So you might have, it's a beautiful death. Something like that, right? Depending on the situation, the result might be taken literally or interpreted as an abstraction. That's really important. These are meant to be prompts. They're meant to get your imagination going. And you're going to be improvising on all this stuff anyway. So really, it's just a prompt to get you into the right headspace. There's an example there. But the way you do it is you roll a feat die and you roll a success die. So you roll one of each. And the feat die tells you which of these first tables you roll on. And the success die gives you basically, it's like rolling a D100 where you've got the two 10-sided dice. Except this is quite interesting. With the feat die, again, we can lean into the Eye of Sauron and the Gandalf rune, in that when you roll a Gandalf rune, all of these actions are positive actions. All of the lore bits are positive. You got, they're all positive for like words. If you roll the Eye of Sauron, they're all very negative. And you can see it starts at A, ends with W, starts with B, ends at S. These are mini tables in their own right. The rest of the tables, 1 through 10, they're all in alphabetical order. A through C, C through D, D through E, etc. So they're literally just alphabetical order where they could be good, they could be bad, they could be middling. But really, the Eye of Sauron and the Gandalf runes are the positive and negative results, which I really like. That's a really nice touch. It really leans into the Eye of Sauron and the Gandalf rune, which are one of the highlights of the system, or the dice mechanic anyway. So that's them. That's the lower table. The Eye of Mordor is the last bit here. There's some small changes made to how the Eye of Mordor, how eye awareness works, and you can see here it's. Actually, I think this is the same as in the core rulebook. It does say these rules are optional. They're recommended for Strider mode. It means to make the campaign more dynamic. I have to say I only skimmed through these because I play tested it only one session. So I'm not 100% sure how different these are. I'm just going to look very quickly at the core rulebook section for this. If anybody spots anything that looks different, if you're very familiar with the book, let me know. Eye awareness 170. Okay, so I'm looking here at the region table. We've got Borderland, Wildland, Darkland, 18, 16, 14. That's the same. Hunt modifiers table, +4, +2, -2, -4. So they look I think they look the same. As described below. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not going to look through this in detail. I don't really see anything that's that different from the core rulebook here. But we do. It is kind of bringing in this ill fortune table, which is actually quite interesting, right? So when you're increasing eye awareness, and you get this eye icon, your eye awareness goes up because you're rolling the Eye of Sauron, right? It's saying also an Eye of Sauron result on an ill fortune table will raise it by 2. This is in addition to the increase. Aha. So there's a bit of a risk if you get an Eye of Sauron on a normal skill roll and you want to use the ill fortune table, and you roll another Eye of Sauron, that's double whammy for eye awareness. That's kind of an interesting little twist to it. There might be something else there. If you spot it, you feel free to mention it in the comments. Revelation episodes. Yeah, I think these are new. I'm pretty sure these are new. So I should just scroll down a bit, really. Yeah, so in the core rulebook, there are 10 examples of Revelation episodes on page 173. Very specific examples, whereas these are specifically written for solo. They're prompts for solo play. And as you can see, things like enemy minions pick up your trail, an important location is overtaken by an enemy, etc. So that's quite a cool thing to have. And yeah, so that'll be new for solo. Okay, let's move on. Adventuring phase. Combat. Yeah, skirmish stance. I mean, this is the big thing here. When things look dire, don't hesitate to flee combat to live to fight another day. I mean, that's really good advice in the normal mode as well. This can be a very deadly game, especially if you're outnumbered or outmatched. If you're playing solo mode and in your first session, or your first adventure phase, you come across any type of troll, don't fight it. Don't try and use those sexy skirmish stances, the stance that you've just received. Run. That would be my recommendation anyway. Those going to be very, very short campaign for you. But anyway, so I guess looking at this, the main change to combat is the skirmish stance. And really, I've mentioned it already before at the beginning of this video. It is a ranged mobile stance. Think of it like Legolas mode, which somebody mentioned earlier. And the way it works here is that anyone who is attacking with a melee weapon, so someone's running up to you, they're attacking you at -1 dice. They lose 1 dice on their attack. people attacking you from a distance, ranged attacks against you have no penalty. So that's important to bear in mind. When you're making range attack rolls, you lose 1 dice. So you shooting ranged is going to lose 1. Now, this isn't super clear to me whether that means because this only works if you're using a ranged attack, right? You have to be using a bow. It says here ranged combat. So does that mean every time you attack, you're losing 1d, whether that's against the ranged adversaries or it's against the melee adversaries? When I play tested it, I did it like that. Every single time I was using my bow in skirmish mode, I was doing it at -1 dice. You could interpret that as being when you're attacking somebody further away from you, you lose 1 die, but when you're attacking everyone engaged with you at melee distance, then you don't lose 1 dice because you're kind of like, doing Legolas. So you're kind of like shooting quickly, point blank, all the rest of it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So, that's the other one. Then to escape from combat, you roll your ranged attack without losing 1 dice on the roll. And if you succeed, you don't do any damage, but you are able to flee the battlefield. So that's also really important for getting away. So skirmish mode is actually quite useful for fleeing too. The combat stance, what's it called? Action, is it called? Combat action, I think. For skirmish stance is called gain ground. And yeah, you make an athletics or a scan roll to gain basically the high ground, if you will. We all know from Revenge of the Sith that once you have the high ground, it's game over, right? Unless you're attacking a troll, then it's not game over. Yeah, there's a little bit to do with that. So skirmish stance is quite interesting. In my playtest, it allowed my elf that I was playtesting with to survive 10 rounds of combat against 3 orcs. But nearly died. But I think if I had just been using the 4 main stances, I probably wouldn't have come out. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to because it was a ranged build, and with ranged build, it just doesn't work with, with 1 player. So yeah, pretty cool. Okay, what's next? Complications and advantages. You've got to work it out for yourself. Yeah, saying here, rolling a Gandalf rune or a Eye of Sauron icon can also serve as a trigger for a complication or an advantage to make a fight more complex and interesting. So you got to bring your own booze, right? You got to make this interesting. You got to spice this up. But that's typical of solo play. You can always roll on the lower tables to kind of come up with some prompts, that sort of thing. Adversary actions. It says an adversary uses the weapon best suited to the situation depending on the stance of the player hero. If there are multiple weapons that could apply, they use the one which gives them the biggest advantage or the greatest chance of dealing damage. So don't do easy mode. Treat the adversaries as if they really want to chop your head off and, stick it on a spear. This is, the advice here is, make the adversaries a challenge. Make their attacks make sense. I think that's really good advice. It doesn't really need to be said technically, but I'm glad it was put in there. And it's saying here as well, I guess this is important. When spending the success icons to trigger special damage from an adversary, these are the success icons on the D6. Use the heavy blow special damage result, unless the adversary lists a special damage option in its stat block. Okay? So they're going to be doing heavy blows, which again is going to really knock your encumbrance down. Fell abilities, if it would give them a clear advantage in combat, they use it, spending the necessary resolve or hate required. If it would come at a cost or pose a risk to them or their allies, you can ask the telling table to determine their behavior. That's also pretty interesting. Yeah. Moving on. Battling yourself. Yeah, you're fighting against yourself, and it's saying here, consider that the point of combat is not to win, but rather to present an exciting, interesting, or important battle. Something that adds to the narrative and challenges your player hero regardless of the outcome. And remember, when your encumbrance drops to 0 in a solo game, you don't have to necessarily die. You might be captured. In fact, it's much more interesting to be captured than to die, or to be left for dead, something like this. Failing in combat doesn't always mean that you're dead. Doesn't have to. Unless you really don't like the build, the character that you just made, and you want to do a different one. Yeah. Councils. They work as before. It's got here 3, 6, or 9 as the goals. Now, I would possibly modify that and make it a little bit lower. Only because this is one thing I noticed when I was doing my combat and it took 10 rounds. There's very little variety when you're just making lots and lots of rolls and trying to interpret what they mean one after the other. And for councils, when you're playing with a group, it's a little bit more varied because different people are doing different things. It feels more dynamic. But when it's just you standing before a council, I think 6 or 9 success goals, or like the goal of being 6 or 9 successes, is a lot of rolling, and I would be tempted to lower that a bit. Bear in mind, I've not play tested that at all, but I think it's worth thinking about. And yeah, maybe something like I don't know, 3, 5, and 7. I think 3 is probably a decent one to start off with. I wouldn't maybe lower that really, but I think 6 or 9 might be a bit high. Anyway, try it out. If it feels a bit high, then if you're going for 6 and you're like, oh, this is taking forever, and I've only got 3 successes, just drop the target down to 5. I won't tell. Role-playing interactions, journeys. Okay, let's jump to journeys then. Journey rules. Yeah, I mean, this is basically you're still doing it like it says in the core rulebook. You are looking at where you want to travel. You are making a travel roll to see how many hexes you're able to travel. On a failure, you're only moving 1 hex. On a success, you're moving... No, on a failure, you're moving... Oh my god, I should probably check this. I have it set here. Here we go, right here. If it was a failure, then the event happens 2 hexes away. If it's a success, it happens 3 successes away. So that hasn't changed here, I don't believe, when I skimmed through it before. No. But what has changed is... Well, there's quite a bit that's changed in journeying. First of all, we don't have the rolls anymore, the fellowship rolls, because it's only you traveling. And that's what this bit here, the journey rolls. So you're tending to all aspects of travel. You still have to roll for journey events, but these events are keyed directly to skills instead of rolls. And this is where it gets really interesting. So the way it works is when you have an event, which is really going to be happening pretty much every time you're going to be making a long journey, because an event is happening either after 2 or after 3 hexes, you roll a feat die, and the feat die determines the type of event that you're going to have: terrible misfortune, despair, ill choices, mishap, shortcut, chance meeting, or joyful sight. Now, I believe these are in the core rulebook somewhere anyway, but that basically determines the type of event that you're going to have. Then, once you've rolled that, you roll a d6 to determine the detail of that type of event. Right? And you can ignore this consequence in the fatigue points gained, because this is actually in each of these tables here as well. And this is where the real magic happens, in my opinion. So let's say you roll for a mishap. I'm using mishap because I was getting mishaps all the time. You roll them on a 4 to 7 on the feat die, which is 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a third of the roll results that you're going to get. So mishaps happen quite often. And I think I rolled 2 wandering enemies in one journey, which is why I had that big attack with 3 orcs. It was an event that was happening, during my journey. So basically, you would roll for a mishap. You would then roll a d6 to determine what that type of mishap is, what type of mishap it is, what the event is that's specifically happening. And it tells you what the event is and what the outcome, the skill roll that's required to resolve it. And I think that's a really nice, elegant way of handling travel events. And again, this is something, if you wanted to, as a lore master in a guided game where you're a lore master, you could really use these tables as well if you're just to, if you want to kind of focus on other things, or you want to just leave it up to chance a little bit. So you would roll the die based on you roll your skill based on what's in the outcome section there. Then at the bottom it says the consequences of the skill roll. So if it fails, you add 1 day to the length of your journey and you gain 1 additional fatigue. And just for having a mishap event, you're still going to gain a number of fatigue points. Now obviously if you have this terrible misfortune, you're gaining 3. If you have the, joyful sight, you're going to have none. And things like chance meeting or the shortcut, you have 1. So, worth pointing out is that these events are very much... I don't want to use the term skewed, but in my opinion, they are they're weighted a bit towards bad things happening. And it would be easy if you wanted to change this column here to make it perhaps a little bit more like 50-50, because if you think about it, the shortcuts, the chance meetings, and the joyful sights are the positive things that are happening. And on an 8, 9, 10, and a Gandalf rune, again, we've got 4 results. That's a third of the feat die. Yeah, I don't know. You might want to change the... I mean, you could change the numbers around if you wanted, but it would be making things a bit more easy, perhaps. Also, bear in mind, for ill choices and mishap, they're not always going to be negative results. For example, sparse wildlife. You're hunting for things. You've lost your direction. The path is obscured. There's some rough terrain. It's not always there's an enemy, they're going to attack you. You have those on the despair results. You have those on the terrible misfortune results. Not so much on the ill choices. So really, if you think of like negative results on this, it's only the top 2, and that's 2 out of 12, which is much better odds. So you've got a third of the results are good, 2 out of 12 of the results, so 1/6 of the results are really going to be quite bad, and the rest of them in the middle there are neutral. Some of them they're kind of like not good, not bad. Maybe they could be bad, like if there's wandering enemies, for example. So that's how those work. I think it's really cool. It uses the same thing from the core rulebook, which depending on the type of land that you're in, you're either rolling this feat die as a favored, normal, or an ill-favored feat die roll, which means you're possibly going to be rolling 2 feat die and taking the best or the worst result. There's more information here, but you can read that yourself when you've got it. I just wanted to kind of explain how it works, and I think I personally find that really, really cool. It's a really nice way of coming up with interesting encounters when you're traveling. And it's saying here, this is worth pointing out, the noteworthy encounters result, as you can see here, noteworthy encounter. I don't think it's on all of them. Here's a noteworthy encounter. It's basically saying this is a scene that needs to kind of resolve itself with more than potentially just a skill roll. And it does say you can actually replace any of the results here with a noteworthy event if it makes sense. So I think that's a thing that's really worth pointing out is, you can kind of roll for an event detail and think, that's kind of a bit boring, or I had that one last time, or I don't know. Actually, it might make more sense because of the hex I'm right next to, or the hex that I'm in right now. Actually, it might make more sense to have something else happen. By all means, it's giving you permission here, not that you need it to use a noteworthy encounter instead. It tells you how to resolve events for a noteworthy encounter. It's giving you advice on how to make your journeys come alive, how to use journeying in cooperative play. And it's basically saying if you've got 2 players, then you don't really need to make any changes. I think if you have more than 3 or more, you should actually use journey rolls and the rules in the One Ring. So that's assigning journey rolls. But in either case, use the original version of the journey events table when playing cooperatively to properly include the company in the consequences of an event. Yeah. Anyway, Fellowship Phase. This is the only bit in the Strider mode about Fellowship Phase, and all it's really telling you is that there's some changes to spiritual recovery. So basically where you're getting rid of shadow points, and yeah, you can read that if you want, but it's just a little, I mean, you can pause the video and look at it now if you want, but really that's all it does. That's the only change it's made. There's not really much more that needs changing with Fellowship Phase. Just talk about, making sure that you're, interacting with the community, because that's important when you're playing solo, and looking for, finishing goals and talking to patrons and all that sort of thing. And that's it. That's Strider mode. How long have I been going for? Almost an hour. Wow. I'm going to rattle through the rest of it very quickly. One thing I wanted to show, and I'll do this now, is how I've implemented these in Foundry. So let me take off PDF Exchange here. And I'm over to my browser, and I'm going to come over here to Foundry. So I don't know how much you know about Foundry. I have here Strider mode. I've got a bunch of tables that I've created. I'm not going to be able to share these tables before you ask in comments or anywhere else because of the IP restrictions on this game. Yeah, you're going to have to input all these yourself. But there's a module called Easy Table, which makes it really easy to do. And basically all of the macros I've created for this, I've shared in the description below. So you can actually grab all these macros, put them into Foundry, copy paste them into Foundry, and then you just need to create it's quite a lot. For example, journey events, this is what's called a nested table. So when you roll, for example, here on the journey events macro, it looks like an easy macro. It's just rolling on this journey events table. But when you roll on it, you roll on the journey events table, and it is then picking up either the despair, ill choices, mishap, shortcut, meeting, misfortune, joyful, etc. And then it's going to basically roll on one of those, which is the D6 ones, and it's going to spit out a result. Anyway, I'll show you how each of these work, how I've implemented them. So let's start with Fortune. You click on Fortune. It's asking you, is it a Gandalf rune or an Eye of Sauron? Let's click Gandalf rune. You gain the attention of a potential ally. Let's do it for ill fortune. An ally becomes a hindrance or liability. So pretty straightforward. And it's telling you here the result of your Gandalf rune or the Eye of Sauron. So it's kind of telling you, which result you rolled in case you want to go through your chat history later. Then we have the telling table. Click on that once. It's going to ask what the chances are. Let's go middling. No. Middling. Yes. Middling. Whoops. Yes, and if we do want to see these other extreme results, let's go with certain results. Oh, it still needs to roll, one of the extreme ends. Whatever. I'll stop rolling. But that's basically, set up to do the telling table tables. Lower table, click it once, and it's giving you an action, an aspect, and a focus. Demand unnatural duty. Hold dark love. Hoard ruined strength. Also kind of interesting. So then we get a revelation episode. I've put these in as well. An ally turns against you. Conflict brews between allies. Conflict brews between allies. Conflict. Okay, there's something coming up here between my allies. And then journey events. Click on journeying events. And that's that nested table I showed you. This is how it looks when it kind of rolls up. I've color-coded it as well, so the positive journey events are green, I believe, and the terrible misfortune, which is the worst result you can roll, so I didn't start off very well, is a kind of a dark red. Violent weather, explore to find shelter. If the roll fails, the target is wounded. I'm wounded. And fatigue points gained 3. So it's giving you all the information you need from these event detail bits here in a simple click of the macro. Again, let's roll it again. Look, I got a chance meeting. Auspicious gathering. It's a noteworthy encounter. Yeah. Anyway, so that's how I've implemented everything to Foundry. All of these macros, the text of these macros, I've put into, I'm sharing because, that is something I am allowed to share. And again, you can find them in the description. Okay. Let's bring PDF Exchange Editor back up, which is the PDF reader I use. And the one thing I wanted to talk about before I finish this up are the Peoples of Wilderland supplement. And again, we're getting Bjornings. Their cultural blessing is furious. When you're wounded, all your attack rolls and protection rolls are favored, which is kind of cool. That would work really well. That will work very well with solo because you are going to get wounded probably in most well, I don't know. If you have a really high parry, then maybe you won't get wounded that often, but you're going to get wounded sometimes. And I think once there's a fairly steep slope of death once you get wounded because there's no one else to kind of pick up the slack and to attack on your behalf. It's just you, obviously, unless you're playing co-op. So I think that could actually make characters quite good in solo. So I think Bjornings I'm actually quite drawn to playing a Bjorning now that I've seen it, just mainly because this cultural blessing. I think that's really, really quite good for solo play. They have a common standard of living, so it's going to affect the starting gear a little bit. That's all right. Yeah, stats are here, skills are here. Scan and athletics are their two favored skills. Combat proficiencies, axes or spears. If you're not playing with axes, then you need to go home. Although if you're playing solo mode, you probably are playing at home, so never mind. But yeah, I mean, come on, axes. It's got to be axes if you're playing a Bjorning, really. As much as I love spears, but if I'm playing a Bjorning, it's going to be an axe. Yeah. Languages, typical names. You got the names down here. Yeah. Anyway, skip along. Virtues. it's all about kind of tying into this sort of bear aspect that Bjornings have. They're not actual skin changers like Bjorn is, but they're kind of his kin. So they are able to, like, there's a possibility to talk to bears. You get, you know, powerful strength, that sort of thing. A skin coat, which means, you know, you kind of have thick skin almost. So you get kind of a plus 1d on your protection rolls if you're wearing leather or no armor, which is kind of interesting. I'm being told that Bjornings in first edition had a reward called Giant Slaying Spear, so I'm wrong. Yeah, okay. I just like axes. And I like spears as well. Anyway, whatever. It's my game, it's solo, I can do what I want! Elves of Mirkwood. I don't like elves. I'm not going to play an elf. If you want to play an elf, fine. Folk of the Dusk, when you are in a forest or at night, you can spend 1 point of hope to achieve a magical success on a skill roll. I don't like them. They're frugal. I'm gonna play a like a human thing, I think. I've never been drawn to elves for whatever reason. I think it's also there's this issue with lore, right? Sorry, I'm kind of getting quite serious here for a second. I'm not a brilliant Tolkien scholar at all. My lore, I've read the Silmarillion beyond the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. I've read the Silmarillion. I don't remember any of it. I read it probably about 20 years ago now. I don't remember any of it. It's all kind of like, for me, if you're playing an elf who's basically like an immortal person should know a lot about the lore, it's hard for me to get into the headspace of that sort of character when I don't personally have that knowledge. That's a me thing for sure, but I've just never been drawn to playing one. So yeah, I'm scrolling through relatively slowly so you can pause it and look at them if you want. Meh. You can be Legolas. That's cool. Woodmen of Wilderland. Cultural Blessing is Woodgoer. You get to add +2 to your parry when fighting in a forest. That's kind of interesting. Very, very, very situational, obviously. I'm going to be playing in and around Tharbad, which has a lot of like desolate, more wastes kind of places. Not a lot of forest. So, kind of metagaming things a little bit, knowing where I'm going to be starting. But I would definitely be playing a Bjorning personally with how I'm planning things, or stick with my original barding concept. But yeah, Woodmen of Wilderland, they have hunting and healing as their favorite skills. There's the picture of them if you want to see that. Names, etc., virtues, hunter's resolve, herbal remedies, etc., 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 etc. Okie doke. So we are right at the 1 hour mark. Yeah. I can see Francesco's telling me that Mirkwood elves are bad, though, not your average elf. Yep. That's fine. That's fine. I'll take your word for it. I mean, Legolas is the typical Mirkwood elf, right? Well, yeah. I mean, they're more fey, I guess, is the point, right? They're more like, if you think of The Hobbit especially, they're not nice elves. They're not, they're not the Lothlorien elves. They're the fey. They're the wild elves. But still, they're elves. Meh. Anyway, I don't want to start a kind of a flame war over it. Let's just have a little think about my campaign then coming forward. I'm going to... This is some of the stuff I want to talk about, right? Oh, one thing I need to talk about first. The character life paths. I'm just going to quickly show this because it's awesome. I love life path systems. And in this, basically, there's a way to randomly start up your character. It doesn't roll for your callings. It rolls up for your culture and your kind of your background. I'm okay with that. I actually like life path systems where your childhood, your upbringing is randomly determined, because in reality, you can't really determine that yourself. It's just how you were born, your situations growing up. Once you become an adult, or you are able to make these sorts of decisions, that's where you choose your thing, like your profession, your calling, whatever. So I quite actually don't mind I have heard people kind of commenting on, oh, it's a shame we don't have callings in these life paths, in this life path system. I personally don't have a problem with that. So the way it works is you roll a success die, which tells you the culture that you're part of. Now, this does not include the 3 new ones. So if you want to include the 3 new ones, you're going to have to come up with probably changes to a feat die, and you're going to have to add the 3 in there somewhere. You're obviously going to skew it to the one you want to play, because you're only going to have 9 results. Right, then for each of them, you get this D6 backstory thing. And the backstory thing, I'll just read one of them. For the barding, It tells you a little bit about how you were brought up, and then it gives you your starting attribute spread, a favored skill, and your distinctive features. Because you get, if we talk here, yeah, anyway, so this is basically a way to randomly say how you were brought up and tie that into your starting stats. And I really love this sort of thing. It's worth doing. And remember, as a solo player, you could roll a couple of times. You could roll, I don't know, 3 or 4 times until you get something you really like. But I would really challenge you to try it, because even though it might not be exactly someone you're excited to play the first time you try it, it is going to really give you some ideas that you wouldn't probably not come up with yourself. And that's always really exciting. It's one of the real benefits of the life path system, is it can surprise you. It's very easy for us to think in terms of cliches and stereotypes when we're creating characters. I mean, I'm talking already about playing a Bjorning with an axe, because that's my preconceived notion of what a Bjorning should have, even though there's obviously precedent for spears. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I'll just roll on it. In fact, why don't I do this live? I haven't put these into Foundry. I may or may not put them into Foundry. I don't know. So I'm going to roll a d6 to start off with. I'm going to ignore the Bjorning. In fact, no, I'll roll a d12. If I roll a 7 or higher on my d12, I'm going to play a Bjorning. I rolled a 3. An elf of Linden. No! Oh, no! That had to happen. Oh, God. All right, I'm sticking with it. Okay, so an elf. So here we go. I'm out of my comfort zone already, right? I'm out of my comfort zone. I rolled an elf. What kind of elf am I going to roll? A 1. Visitor to the mountains. Not content to stay in your homeland. No way was I content to stay in my homeland. You were drawn to the Blue Mountains and the folk who reside there, the dwarves. Most dwarves want nothing to do with an over-curious elf, but a few taught you enough for you to appreciate their skills and the love of beautiful objects. You wonder what you could learn in other lands, and now prepare for a longer journey. Okay, I could maybe get into the shoes of that elf. Maybe, but it's still an elf. Strength 5, Heart 2, Wit 7. I start with a favorite skill of lore, obviously because I've spent time with the dwarves. And I'm fair and swift. Alright, so that's how it works. Then, so it ends here. You can see Rangers of the North. I'm jumping ahead in my bookmarks, which you can't see on the screen. Then we get this major events thing, and that has a feat die on it. I'm going to roll another d12. And basically what it tells you is you have this basically this event that happened during your childhood. So growing up, you became a 9. Vigorous. Then there's an effect. A strong constitution and maybe a passion for food made you bigger and sturdier, but less graceful in your movements. I'm an elf who spent time with the dwarves. Come on, clearly. I was eating dwarf food. Yeah, so my endurance goes up by 2. My parry goes down by 1. So got a bit of a potbelly, I guess. So yeah, that's how it works. And that's it. That is it. So, yeah, kind of cool, quite exciting. I think, and for this life path system, I think you could even, if you're really drawn to a specific culture, you don't have to roll that cultural table at the front. I could just think, I want to be a Bjorning, but I want to add some flavor to my Bjorning. I want to roll on the relevant background table for them. Bearing in mind there isn't one for the Bjornings, but some people have created some. I think first edition had some of these some similar tables. So anyway, there's a possibility to maybe use a fan-made expansion to this, or to maybe use first edition if you have that. And yeah, just really give you some additional flavor for your character, an additional direction to take them. And it's all optional. You can kind of maybe cherry pick some of the stuff. If it gives you ideas for the backstory of your character and you ignore the kind of mechanical aspects of it, like the attribute spread, or you want to change your favorite skill, you don't like the one listed there, by all means do it. But it can really help you to come up with some interesting character concepts. I'm not playing an elf who spent time with dwarves before anybody really presses me on that. That was just the first fluke time I rolled on it, and it's not canon in my head. But yeah, I think that just using them for getting a bit of a backstory, thinking about how your character was brought up is really good. And I think also having the major events is really good, because then you also add a bit more depth to your character. It's modifying your stats or mechanically somehow, but in a way that kind of makes sense for your character. So yeah, I strongly recommend using it. Again, it can be completely optional. You can always go back to how it's done written in the core rulebook without doing a life path if you really aren't happy with what you've come up with. But again, in solo play, that's kind of the beauty of it. You can do whatever you like. No one's going to be a rules lawyer when you're playing by yourself, unless you're streaming, of course. Then you will possibly get that I got a rule wrong, etc. That's fine. Yeah, so I guess the one thing to talk about is really quickly is what am I going to be changing? What am I going to talking too fast? What am I going to be changing about my concept for my campaign that I'd already kind of been developing? First of all, I'm still definitely going to be playing in and around Tharbad, because the Ruins of the Lost Realm source book is so rich, so good for solo play, that it would be folly to ignore it. I'm really excited to play there. In terms of character concept, I need to think about this a bit more. I've only had Bjorn, the additional Peoples of Wilderland expansion, for like 2 days, something like that. So it is the new shiny, but I'm really drawn to the Bjorning culture. So I feel like I might be changing to become a Bjorning instead of being a Barding. But I do also like my Barding concept as well. So what I might do is I might take my original Barding that I had created, and I might roll on the background tables for that Barding and see if anything really jumps out that I really like the sound of, to try and give a bit more flesh to his bones, if you will. And then I'll wait and see if over the next couple of days someone in one of the communities makes a fan homebrew Peoples of character life path system tables, for the 3 additional Peoples of Wilderland cultures. If and when that happens, I'll also be rolling up a Bjorning character in terms of backstory, and just see how that pans out. And then I'm just gonna figure out what I like. I might actually post them on the character concepts on my Discord channel for people to kind of maybe vote on. That could be interesting. We'll have to wait and see. In fact, I might do that. I will do that. So if you want to have some say in the kind of character I'm going to be creating, I'm not going to put the elf in there. I'm not going to put the elf in there. I'm not going to put the elf in there. I might put the elf in there too. But of course, people will just be voting on that one day. I had to think long and hard whether I'm going to do that. But yeah, so if you want to have some say in how my campaign starts in terms of who my character is going to be, then you need to be in my Discord server. There's a link to it in the description below. Yeah, I'm going to stop there because I wanted to keep this to around about an hour, and we're just a little bit over an hour now. So please, Lord of the Elves, put the elf in there. Okay, see, this is what's happening. It has to be a character no, I guess it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a character I care about. I mean, what's to say this character is going to survive the first travel encounter? No, we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to stop here. Thanks very much for watching. If you have any comments or questions or anything, then you can drop them in the comments below. I can be found on my Discord server if you want to chat about this. I'm also active in the One Ring Discord server if you're a member of that too. But yeah, basically very excited to get started. I'm very excited that Strider Mode is finally out, and can't wait. And I'm even more excited that the Peoples of Wilderland and the Character Life Paths dropped at the same time. I was not expecting that. So not only are we given these rules for playing solo characters, we're also given a bunch of additional character options, which is just amazing. Really, really cool. So thanks for watching this. If you liked this video, please hit the like button. That really does help the channel. And if you like my channel, if you like what I'm doing, then hit the subscribe button, because that also helps my channel to grow, and you'll get alerts to when I'm doing new content, like the actual play. And just again, if you jumped in late to the stream, my actual play campaign is going to be 30 minutes-ish in duration each episode, so I deliberately try to keep them a little bit shorter, easier to access. They are heavily edited as well, so they're not live streamed. They're recorded in advance, and then I've got someone helping me with editing so that there's sound in the background, there's sound effects if we need them, some visual stuff that pops up, etc. And if I need to stop for 5 or 10 minutes to think about I've rolled on an oracle, I've rolled on the lore table, and I'm like, how am I gonna fit that in? I can just pause after I roll it, and we can, while I'm doing 10 minutes of trying desperately to get some inspiration, we can just cut that out in editing. So nice and simple. That's how it works. That's what's going to be happening. So thanks very much for everyone who joined live, and thank you for watching. And we'll catch you next time when I start the campaign, hopefully in 3 weeks' time. Cheers. Bye-bye. Awkward while I'm trying to find my farewell overlay. There it is. Bye-bye.